Okay, thank you so much. I figured we would just start with some brief opening remarks to establish some context, tell you a little bit about ourselves and our work. And then we're just going to have a conversation, Rosalba and I, and then we're going to ask you to get into the conversation with us by asking questions, making remarks. Does that all make sense? Okay, great. My work at Grantmakers in the Arts is largely focused around advocacy for folks who support the arts to do so as equitably, as responsively as possible. And so a lot of that hinges around considerations of who gets support. A lot of what we try to impress upon folks in our world, which is largely about 300 foundations, government agencies, nonprofits that do re-granting. And a lot of what we basically try to lay bare are kind of things that are inherently unfair in the field and ways to address them. So, one of those is issues around racial equity in arts funding. When you look at the population of the US, we're a country where about, a third of the population are people of color. About 4% of arts philanthropy go to organizations of color. And so how that winds up manifesting in the field is you have the largest white theater in America has an annual operating budget of about $60 million. The largest black theater has an operating budget of about $5 million, I want to say. The largest Latina theater, I thought it was $4 million. Apparently, it's $3.7 million a year. And so, one of the things that we've been looking at is to what extent is that changing? So we do a survey every year, and so it looks like in terms of what is going up, with our members, actually support for the arts is going up. That's fantastic. Multi-year support going up, also great. Support for individual artists going up, and increased support to BIPOC artists, BIPOC organizations, trans artists, and artists with disabilities going up. So this is all very encouraging. But accompanying that good news are challenges like expanding support to include individual artists going down, right? That is, organizations who have not supported individual artists in the past, beginning to support them, that's been going down. Increased flexibility with the use of funds, increased general operating support, and relaxing reporting requirements going down. Now, this is inherently troubling. With that said, I want to establish some context. These all increased after 2019 during the pandemic. They've simply decreased since 2021. So, I just want to keep that in context. For further context, we saw an increase in general in philanthropic giving in 2020 and in 2021. These are all good things. Also keep in mind the stock market was booming in 2020 and 2021 because the stock market is not the economy. The stock market is how confident are the rich feeling. Right? And a lot of money was moving, largely through online retail, and those who owned corporations were feeling good, What you saw was a field that was the field of arts and culture that was being buoyed by an increase in support, specifically an increase in general operating support, both very good things, also being buoyed by a big decrease in expenses, largely personnel, largely people getting laid off because people weren't going to theaters as much. It was actually mostly specifically theaters. Museums were doing relatively well. So I wanted to put all of that into context. I also wanted to make clear that it was a time specifically when these increases were particularly helpful for organizations of color. That's very unusual in the arts funding field. But with that said, there is no guarantee that will be sustained. It already appears that in 2022, while our members increased their funding, the larger field of philanthropic giving was beginning to already show signs of stepping back, right? The stock market wasn't going quite as crazy. We were also on the verge of default, and banks were shutting down. So we're at kind of a really important moment for the entire field right now, where we're seeing a lot of really positive changes, and the most important thing is sustaining those changes so that the field remains healthy and equitable as people start coming back to their jobs, as people start coming back to theaters, as people start living with the pandemic in a way that they hadn't prior. So that is all for the sake of establishing some context. And now I want to hand it off to Rosalba to give us a bit of background on you and your work, and then we can get into a conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you, Eddie. Just to mention that Eddie and I have known each other for a long time. That's why the matching colors, we did not hire a fashion consultant. We just happened to see each other on the train and say, what happened here? So wonderful to see you and see some familiar faces, and thank you all for being here. What you have mentioned, Eddie, is so crucial in terms of context, because you have, we were talking a few minutes ago, you have seen the entire pyramid, right? I mean, from your work as a deputy commissioner, and so that means public funding and public life, philanthropic, in terms of foundations, and now you're sustaining that triangle as CEO of Grantmakers in the Arts. So is that window of opportunity to look at how we are structured in the United States in terms of philanthropy, in terms of giving, in terms of what it means to be a nonprofit, and how it is up to, in many ways, to our own institutions and organizations and initiatives to find ways to sustain that structure for ourselves and for our own community. And so in our case, I am, as you know, as you heard, the artistic director of Pregones and Puerto Rican Traveling Theater, which is a merger of two theaters. I co-founded Pregone. I didn't do it alone. No one can do this alone. I co-founded Pregones in 1979 as a touring company, as a Puerto Rican touring company, creating works that of our, producing our own work, creating our works that could fit in places like a community college, or in a church, or on the lobby in a housing project, or whatever, in the front lines, as well as in a large stage. And we have traveled around the country. Last count, 538 cities, 37 states, and 18 countries. So that means that we've seen a lot of not only our own work grow, but the work across the country grow, and have established these relationships. Some of them have lasted for years. So when I say we don't do it alone, is because in our case, Pregones eventually entered a conversation with Miriam Colon, who was the founder of the Puerto Rican Traveling Theater, that iconic leader that created this space in Hell's Kitchen in Manhattan, when it was truly Hell's Kitchen. When she said, we need a space, our community needs this space, and it was an abandoned firehouse, and then the city was able to dispose of it and say, okay, we'll designate it for your theater. She didn't do it alone. She had Marlon Brando by her side. She had Raul Julia by her side. And they rallied behind her until they built the theater. And eventually, 40 years later, when her health was declining and everything seemed to be coming to a halt, we said, we need to join forces, make sure that this continues to thrive. In the meantime, the Broadway district kept moving the line up, and now it is in the middle of the Broadway district, to the point where people walk around and it's like, what the hell is this doing here? Not knowing that it was there long before everyone else was there. So, and it was visionary. And a lot of our institutions of color, or led by women, or rural institutions. I want to talk about the rural geography as well. Rural institutions that are, regardless of race, are the first ones. What does it mean to be the first of something, or to be an initiator of something because maybe someone did it 200 years ago and we don't know about it. But in this century, we were the first to do this, you were the first to do that. So I put that in that context because when we decided to merge our both organizations, then we had our beautiful Bronx Theater that is very active, and then we have the Puerto Rican Traveling Theater in Manhattan, which is very active, and now we have these two very distinct geographies and an audience that travels back and forth, and an audience that otherwise would have gone only to Manhattan are now being attracted to see our work in the Bronx and vice versa. So all this dynamic is only a reflection of what's happening in other parts of the country. We are not alone in this. But there are other parts of the country where, in our case, the Latina theater is just the only one in that whole state, for example, or the only initiative. And what happens to them? This is when coalition building is so important, and this is why we are part of NALAC, of the National Association of Latino Arts and Cultures, which is based in San Antonio, and it's a national organization that brings together artists and cultural bearers from all disciplines to make sure that we have an ongoing dialogue and support. And one of NALAC's, and looking at the financial context of our field, that's when NALAC decided to be an intermediary for funding, to the point that is now a funder as well. And just like they did, NALAC does that, there are other initiatives that are coming up, and are being developed as we speak, to be able to establish a firm root and firm financial sort of entry into conversations of equity with our counterparts that are much larger than we are. And that's when, that has been over the years a practice and a given that we are there, we're doing the work, and we're just a phone call away from the large institution who needs some advice and who needs to figure out what to do something, and we get what we call the call, la llamada. And so, anyway, I'll stop there. But thank you. But I wanted to talk about NALAC, and I wanted to talk about, and also, if I may, I just finished my term as my 4-year term as a Tony Award nominator, and to think about that process that lands you in that position is very, very interesting journey, because it also sort of unveils other realities of our industry in a more mainstream sectors where our voices are still, years behind.
That's fantastic, Rosalba. Thank you. I wanted to talk about exactly that point. So you've shared kind of two elements of our field. On one hand, there is sort of the mainstream, entertainment field, and on the other hand, there's kind of the field of self-determination, like what you did. Working with your community to create your place. Could you talk a little bit about what's happening recently in Broadway and off-Broadway, and how it relates to our communities?
Yes, so what we see, on the one hand, the larger institutions are still figuring it out. They're still calling and hiring consultants and making many of them real honest efforts to change, because they were not built to do that, to be able to be inclusive or diverse, and that is not in their DNA. But I have to say that I have been in conversations with some of the leadership of the largest institutions, and they really want to be able to make those changes. It's going to be a long road ahead, but at least it's encouraging to know that there is a desire. There's also a lot of opposition as well. On the off-Broadway community, that we have to remember that there are some theaters, some large off-Broadway theaters that are considered off-Broadway, but who run Broadway productions, right? So that those theaters have more of an ear to the ground and are able to enter into different kinds of conversations. But what we have noticed is a real increase in interest from the off-Broadway community on Latina playwrights and projects and initiatives and ideas. So we are surrounded by wonderful playwrights who are seeing for the first time their work being mainstream like that, or seen on a different kind of not only economic sphere, but also in terms of visibility and branding within the mainstream conversation. And so that is happening. Of course, again, that is happening in large cities. You know, it's happening in LA, it's happening in New York City, it's happening in places where a lot is going on, less so in other places. But there is certainly an interest, and we are, when we get those phone calls, sometimes is because they have done that first step, they opened that door. Granted, the door has been kicked and kicked and kicked for years. And now what? You know. So to give you an example, I received a call once from one of the largest institutions in New York City a few years ago, and they were bringing in a group from Argentina, and a junior hire, you know, called, and they asked him to call me and said, we are in need of Latinos because we're having this Argentinian play and we're hoping that you can help us. And I had never heard from this person. I said, who are you? He was like an intern or something. I said, could you tell your artistic director that I am the artistic director of this organization and to please call me? I became a snob in a minute. I'm not like that, I swear. I mean, God knows, you know, but it was like, what is going on? But at any rate, I did not get that other phone call. I did get from someone else. And I said, well, we can help. I mean, I know one Argentinian I can call. And not true, I know more, but I just did not want to get engaged in that conversation, be engaged. But then I felt for the artists who were coming, I was not going to have an audience. And so I said, okay, we have to, out of solidarity, we just have to do this. And so we do it, you know, out of for support. But I have to sometimes put my foot down and say, this conversation is over, you know. And sometimes if the conversation is in the right place, then we go for it. And in terms of, and I mentioned that, I digress a little bit on that Broadway combination, because you have wonderful theaters who are doing Broadway shows, who also have their off-Broadway arm, and they are doing everything that they can to make sure that happens. But there is such a disconnect sometimes with the audience that they serve in terms of that programming, that's another issue they have to take into consideration. So we saw last season, or the season before that, I should say, was this surge of, after the pandemic, of Black plays, productions on Broadway. And we were like, yes, you know, it's happening. And then I began, as a nominator myself, I have to dig into everything. And I'm saying, wow, most of them are limited runs. And then I said, okay, but it's a start. And it was a start. It was apparently not sustainable because it was not repeated this past season at the same rate. Latinx productions were non-existent in that area. There was only one Asian production, which was attacked by the media. Or Native American. I mean, it was just like, what is going on? Or rural white, for example, which is another pocket that I think that we need, another group of people we need to talk about and establish ties and solidarity with. So I'm thinking, so that, but on the other hand, the glass ceiling now has a big scratch. Hopefully it will break at some point, but it's not there yet. And so I want to say that there is goodwill on some pockets of that sector of our industry that I believe we need to continue to force the conversation, but also from a point of view of an equal partner. And one of the examples I gave Eddie before we were talking is that one of these institutions approached us and they assumed, although not with a bad feeling, they assumed that we needed the money, and they said, you know, we have this amount. If we can enter, we can give it to you to enter the project. And I looked at them, I said, I love the project. We don't need the money. Let's split it. I said, what do you mean? But we have all this. We don't need the whole thing. Could we use it? Of course. But I knew that if I accepted that, the relationship would have been different. The difference right now is that we are we did a beautiful project together. We are an ongoing conversation about future projects because we're talking about in a whole different atmosphere. So a lot of it is strategic, but sometimes it's hard to say no to an offer. And I don't want to blame any sister organization if they have to say yes to something, because it is very complicated to sustain ourselves in this kind of landscape.
Now, when we were preparing for this, you told the story of working with Luis Valdez and how that was such a point of contrast for you in terms of how you were treated and how you've brought that legacy forward. Could you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, that was a long time ago. It was in the 70s, and we were all very young, and I was in the audition trail, and we were constantly, and I had found myself an agent, and I was sending me to auditions, and I had heard of couch casting. I didn't know exactly what that meant. I would soon find out. And I heard about the harassment that young women went through in auditions, especially young women of color, and I began to experience some of that in my audition process. I didn't know what to do, or meaning, for example, I go for an audition. This character is about a hospital and a tragedy, and she's a nurse. And they tell me there's 5 men, and they had this table, and they said, okay, to begin the audition, go on top of the table and dance. And I'm saying, she's a nurse. And I said, oh, okay, and something clicked. I said, may I go to the restroom, a bathroom, because I want to chop. Oh, sure, make yourself pretty. And I ran down the stairs and left, running for my life. And the second time it also happened, I was right across in a beautiful condo across from the United Nations. And when something told me when I went into this apartment for the audition, and he said, just make sure you lock the door behind you. Something happened. I locked it, and I sort of remember, I said, okay, this is the way you open it back. And I did, and the moment, took 5 minutes for him to tell me, okay, pull your skirt up. And I'm like, why? He said, just pull it up. And I said, okay. And then he said, excuse me, he went to the bathroom, but, and I went to the door. I ran down 9 floors, and I called then a very robust Hispanic organization of Latin actors, Hola, who had a case and a partnership with Backstage Magazine, a newspaper, who would be talking about these instances, and they would publish the name of the producers that were doing this. So there was a movement to really protect all of us, and so when Luis Valdez and Teatro Campesino brought Suit to Broadway, which they were also really treated very badly, they called for auditions, and I was the dancer, and I said, oh my God, I don't think I can handle another audition, but I went. And the way he and his team treated us with such respect, such care, as a moment by moment, making sure we were comfortable. They had women dealing with the young ladies. We were all like 23, 24 years old. It was incredible. We said, oh my goodness, it is possible. It is possible, and we have to make it possible. And fast forward 40 years later, he was a guest at NALAC as a speaker, and I in my introduction of him, I talked about this. I said, so thank you 40 years later for having me treated with such respect. 40 years ago, when things were not that way, you were in the forefront of treating each other with respect.
No, that's amazing. Thank you for sharing that. I wonder if you would take a few moments to talk about the Latinx directory, the Latinx initiative and the RISE directory.
Sure. The National Latinx Theater Initiative was formulated in a conversation between the Mellon Foundation and Jose Luis Valenzuela, the artistic director of LATC and Latino Theater Company in LA. And the idea was to create a funding mechanism for theaters, for Latinx theaters. And Mellon Foundation committed $5 million to initiate this project. That was about 3 years ago, 2.5 years ago. And Jose Luis immediately convened a national steering committee, of which I'm a part of. And our task of the past year and a half, under the leadership of Olga Garay, who's also a very experienced person in the foundation world and lives in LA, put together a whole survey of Latinx theaters around the country. Well, actually, I thought it was 133, but it's 141 theaters responded and filled out the survey. We began to redefine what we mean by a legacy theater, not to define a legacy theater by budget size, but because they really have been at it for 30, 40 years, perhaps in a geographic location where funding is not possible in the ways we see in New York City, for example, or Chicago, right, or LA, or whatever. And so to create categories based on the history that we bring to the table. And those are the categories created for the different amounts that will be distributed. The guidelines will go out next month. And there, extreme steps that we have taken to secure the transparency of the process. So those of us, for example, our theaters are able to apply, cannot be in panels, all of those things that we know need to happen to make sure that the process is very separated. So we put together a peer panel review, and it's going to operate like a mini foundation, and it's going to be, but the budget has increased, and shortly after, foundation came in, Rockefeller Foundation, and we're up to $9 million now, hopefully to make it grow to 15 million. So that is one of the initiatives that you'll hear about in the next couple of months, July and August, for our theaters around the country of different sizes. And what we learned is we need operating support. So that's going to be the basic granting goal, is to give operating grants to our theaters, large and small. And then there is the RISE Theater Directory, and which is a very interesting initiative by Lin-Manuel Miranda and Luis Miranda and his father and the Miranda Family Fund, in partnership with Música Maestra, and in partnership also with the Broadway League and several other partners. And the idea is to establish a directory, a theater directory of practitioners, of behind-the-scenes practitioners of all kinds, anyone whose face is not on stage. And that's from ushers to electricians to carpenters to lighting designers to costume designers to wig makers to anybody who is not on stage can create a profile and in this directory, and it is for everyone, obviously, and of course there's a lot of emphasis in people of color, because the numbers are at less than 4%, and in some cases less than 1% or in the industry are designers or that are at that level. There are two categories in the RISE Theater Directory, and actually the website is RISE, RISE Theater, TRE.org. And if you are an organization who hires personnel like him and like them, and then you make a pledge, and your pledge is, I will look at this directory when I'm looking for people. And if you are a person, a laborer, then you can create for free your own profile, and it gives you about 30 categories that you can check from, everything that happens behind stage. So that if I am an organization looking for someone who's willing to travel to so and such a state to do this, that is experienced in handling fine arts works on a stage for whatever, all of those details, or a composer for theater. So then out of the 500, 600, 1,000 names we hope to have, 15 will pop, and then you can begin your interview process through that directory. So I hope that all of these are instances in which we continue to elevate our presence and our ways of working with each other, regardless of where we are at that. Along with that, we had a conversation about not limiting our vision to to diversity of race or racial or ethnic diversity, because we have a huge class structure system crisis in this country, and we also have to address those class issues as part of why our industry is structured the way it is. It is the most overlooked item in the conversation of diversity. We never talk about it.
That's an amazing story, and I am so glad that they are accessing your leadership as part of that effort. That is fantastic. That is going to be a huge game changer for this field nationally. So thank you for doing that, Rosalba. Talking about the issue of looking at the breadth of diversity and particularly around sort of socioeconomic diversity, can you talk about your partnerships? And I'm also thinking specifically about your partnerships in rural communities.
Sure. Just last month, no, in March, oh my goodness, it's June. You understand me. March 30th, we had a great concert at Pregones celebrating the 30th anniversary of our creative collaborations with Appalachian artists that have been associated with Apple Shop and Roadside Theater, the founding members. They're older, they're not longer with the company, but we continue to work together. We have created 3 productions together. A new volume of 2 amazing books called Art in a Democracy just came out. And so we have right now 3 generations of artists from Pregones and from Appalachia that have worked together and continue to work together. We will get together again in Richmond in September, and then travel up to Whitesburg, Kentucky again. And it is beautiful how we have learned we're family, learn to love each other, and learn to live with each other in so many ways. When things got really difficult under the Trump years, we said, they said, you have to come over. We said, is it safe? Because we didn't know. Everything was just so crazy. And it was just beautiful. I mean, the way the entire community showed up, and we had the best time ever. And so I say all this because this is one of the partnerships that we value, just as partnerships with also younger organizations. We have a commitment to training young people, a commitment to the elders, and you have to learn when someone else does it better than you do, or when someone is set up better in or has a situation that's ideal. So, for example, for our youth training, the Raul Julia training unit that was created under Miriam, we said, how can we do service really to the Raul Julia training unit? And we have partnered with Revolución Latina, which is an amazing training organization in New York, and led by Luis Salgado, who's an amazing director in his own right. And they do the training year-round and pockets throughout the season. And we're able to serve so many emerging professional artists who can go and take this conservatory type of training through them. And those are the partnerships that we value, these partnerships, because they are really truly important. Community-wise, we partner with the Bronx Gardens, and there is a whole variety of community gardens throughout the Bronx. And we partner with the different community leaders in the gardens so that we can go on Saturdays over the summertime and create content or present work, both with the artists from that community and guest artists. So partnerships are something that's very, very special for us to be able to increase our impact, hopefully, in a very healthy way.
No, that's amazing. And as I understand it, you tell me if I've got this history right. The collaboration started because there was a bit of back and forth as to which community was the lowest income community in America, right? Yeah.
We began this competition between, actually the original competition was between Roadside, Appalachia, New Orleans, the black community, artists in New Orleans with Junebug Productions. Eventually we lost our dear John O'Neill, the founder of Junebug, but, and us, at who's the poorest, who is in the worst condition. We decided we were cousins, lost long cousins, and we better do something about it. Yes, that's how the conversation began. You're absolutely right, Eddie. And part of it had to do with when I remember when we saw Roadside perform for the first time, we thought, this is like Appalachian Pregones. This is like us in Appalachia. The themes, the concerns, the experience, so similar. And the only thing I could remember was the Beverly Hillbillies show. Some of you may be too young to remember, but it was, now that we look at it, a horrible representation of Appalachian people. And we said, I have to get that out of my head. And at some point, we got together, and it was so funny because it was like we were looking at each other's mouths to make sure we understood our accents and that we got it right. But the one beautiful poetic moment was the first time we ever presented them at our theater. It was full of people from our community, and the way we advertised it was not people from Appalachia. We said mountain people from the mountains, and we understand mountains as Caribbean people. And they came, and after the show, after the whole performance of Roadside with their Appalachian accent, an audience member who became eventually a member of our board said to me, Rosalba, I did not understand anything, but I understood everything. And that became our mantra and the bond that has kept us together for 30 years.
That's beautiful. And one of the other things that we were talking about, preparing for this was, that is such an example of something that defies expectations, something that's not expected. And you were also talking about how, as people of color in theater, it's so easy to assume that all you can produce are identity plays, that you kind of almost get put into this box. Can you talk about that a little bit, particularly in relation to the work that you've been doing?
That is both an opportunity and a challenge, because we have the opportunity to enlighten our, people who don't know who we are about who we are. It also is an opportunity to reinforce in our own community the value of who we are with these identity plays, but it also puts us in this box, and it's like a handcuff. You can't move away from there. If you're not doing an identity play, you're not Latino enough, or you're not this enough, or you're not, if I'm a woman and I don't talk about being a woman, you're not feminist enough. I mean, it's like, can I talk about birds? Or something, and in our piece, The Desire of an Astronaut, I remember how hard it was. In the beginning, it was like, why are you talking about astronauts? Because we're interested in science. Don't we, for the past 100 years, have been talking about arts and sciences? Do we ever talk to scientists? Do we ever come together and talk about science and have a play about science, for example, right? And so we want, we have been in a way, our own worst enemies, because it's hard to get away from that. But I'm telling you, if I get a phone call because I don't perform anymore, I've been directing for the past almost 20 years, but I get an occasional phone call, because it's an abuela somewhere in a role play. I said, does the abuela have a name? If she's going to wear a moño or an apron, I'm not doing it. And is she like the martyr abuela? Because I want her to be bad. So it's like, we have to get away from our own cliches because it's just too much. So I do challenge my colleagues to, and of course the abuela always dies in the second act. So she has to leave. Why? Because that makes it for a far more interesting script when the abuela leaves. And what happens to the characters. I can tell you, my mother lives with us now, 93 years old, and I have become a professional liar. Because I want to make sure she's happy. I want to make sure I protect her emotionally. So yes, the dynamics change when that abuela is at home throughout the second act. And so these are the things that, yes, the identity play, we need to give ourselves permission to do that. And sometimes what happens is in these partnerships, we are called, because we bring that to the table for the repertoire of the organization who wants to partner with us. So that's part of the conversation we need to have, because we want to have the freedom to do that. I love historical plays for that reason, because it really is just about the historical moment and what is happening at that moment we're talking about, not necessarily about I'm a woman, I'm Puerto Rican. I don't do that every morning. I don't look at myself in the mirror in the morning and say, I'm Rosalba, I'm Puerto Rican, and I have to go to work. I just go out and I deal with it, whatever. And so this is what I hope that we can achieve as we create. I think in the visual arts that have been great accomplishments in that area, less so in theater, I believe. And dance, of course, also is always exploring. So I want us to give ourselves permission to explore all this variety of themes. And I will digress for a moment to talk about someone that I know of, and I haven't met him personally because that's my goal for this year. His name is Pedro Rodriguez III. His grandfather was one of the founders of El Gran Combo, the Great Puerto Rico Orchestra. And his grandfather was a composer and a salsero. And his son became a scientist, Pedro Rodriguez II. And Pedro Rodriguez II became one of the most important scientists and researchers of NASA. And then he had nothing to do with music. And he raised his son, Pedro Rodriguez III, who is the son of a scientist and the grandson of the founder of a salsa orchestra, to become today one of NASA's finest illustrators, combining science and the visual arts. And he has a whole segment of the visual arts in NASA. So when we see those beautiful painters, the realization, the visualization of what they see in space, on painting and on posters, that is happening under the work of Pedro Rodriguez III. And I do that when he gave us permission to say to his father, I'm not only a scientist, I'm not only an artist, I want to be both. And so I think that is sort of, those are the intersections that I value and that I hope that we can do more of.
It was actually the point you just made about seeing visual artists being given this permission to present outside of the narrative, the identity narrative, in a way that the performing arts haven't. I hadn't thought about it that way before, but that's really interesting. I mean, particularly you see a couple of recent shows at the Whitney Museum of Art, the one that just passed recently that was specifically about Puerto Rico, and I think it was either the last biennial or 2 biennials ago, that actually featured far more Latina artists than they ever have before, and specifically, I think it was Puerto Rican artists, who were using very experimental visual strategies that are not associated with craft, that are not associated with traditionally Caribbean strategies. And I hadn't thought about it before in terms of, is the performing arts being given a similar space?
I mean, there are plenty of artists who are doing it. I'm not saying that there isn't. I think we need more of that, and we need to produce those works with the confidence that our audience, see the audience, if you do your job right, our audience trusts our judgment and our aesthetic judgment. And so this is why I think we have something there that has the potential to be big, because if I bring something to the foreground, we're doing the astronaut piece again this year, actually, by the way, next year, and let's see how it goes, but we owe it to our audience to provide the broadest theme landscape possibly that we can possibly offer, and I hope that and it's happening. It's not that it's not, but I think that we can push a little further.
And you've had some really great successes. I mean, fantastic successes that I think have been felt, throughout the city and throughout the nation. First, I wanted to congratulate you, but also, to give you a moment to reflect on those successes.
Thank you. Yes, we have, sometimes when a show is happening, a performance is happening, and there's this full theater, and I'm sitting there, and Angie was just there last week to one of them. And I'm sitting there, and I'm thinking, I have to say, because we started as a touring company. We did not want to have a space, and certainly not two. But that it happened. It just happened. And I'm thinking, how the hell did we get here? How did this happen? You cannot be that. I don't know of a single artist director or founder that has said to me, oh, I'm going to have a company and a theater. I'm going to have a repertoire of 50 plays. No, that happens over time. How do you build this repertoire? How does Intempo build a repertoire of partnerships and content, for example, of music right here in Connecticut? And so how does that happen? It happens over time. And so when we have our big pieces that make it to festivals, international festivals, we bring back, for example, the Red Rose coming up now, the Harlem Hellfighters on the Latin Beat, Aloha Boricua. These are all things that we do that are kind of things that people really, really enjoy. And because they enjoy it, we enjoy it. And for me, one of the most important moments is when someone says, as they leave the theater, I hear them talking about the experience they just had and what it meant for them. And I think that those oral testimonials are, to me, the most valuable and what keeps me going in so many ways.
And so often artists of color, people of color in the arts are basically looked at as the solution to diversity, And you've been talking about the diversity within the Latina community and things that we need to take seriously, which is, I'm sure, true of every community of color. Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yes, I think that we have diversity challenges within our own organizations, and I love the fact that when you come to Pregones, it's like visiting the United Nations, and we are really truly rooted in our Puerto Ricanness, but even because we were recent immigrants when we created Pregones, all of us were from the island, Even the moment when we began to work with the New Yorker artists, we thought, I'm looking at another side of my life, the other side of me, like a two-way mirror. And that two-way mirror was telling us that we were missing something. We were missing that. And this is why our first diversity experiment was to integrate within our own other half, which was especially the Bronx New Yorkers and the Lower East Side New Yorkers. And it was, frankly, at times like Appalachian, right? Who are these people? Like, who are you? And it's so interesting to the family that we've created, the backbone that we've created, that is a combination of those two parts of who we are. And that began to expand. And so when you come to our office, we have the business manager is Puerto Rican. Our person that handles all of our insurance and everything that is operational is Dominican. The person who handles all of our contract is from Ecuador. The person and our production assistant is Venezuelan. Our production manager is Peruvian. And so, oh my God, we have the best food parties ever to begin with, but none of that denies or brings doubt as to who each of us are and why they're there and feel at home and why they need to be there to make us feel complete. And so this is why I think that we need to open up. And so when people talk about values and core values, I say, very simply, if you want to work with us, you need to be comfortable in a bilingual or multilingual environment sometimes. If you're homophobic, you can't work with us. If you don't like to be led by women, you certainly cannot even open the door. Before you know it, you have this really strong core. We're not the only ones. I talk about this with my peers and my peers at Repertorio Español and at Teatro SEA, everywhere. And we say, look at us. It is the diversity within us that we also need to continue to nurture and grow.
And our office at Grantmakers in the Arts and your office at your theater at Pregones are walking distance. We're both located in the South Bronx, and you're right. It is the best food in that neighborhood.
Yeah. And now, because you've asked me, I have to ask you a question. So one day, I mean, Eddie, you've been, as I said in the beginning, at all these three. I mean, in the public as deputy commissioner, you did an amazing job, because shortly after we had our commissioner had to be absent for a medical leave, and you took over and represented the whole city of New York in so many platforms. And then you were in foundation, and now you are overseeing this. And then Grantmakers in the Art, one day the new president and CEO says the office is going to be in the Bronx. Talk about that.
You know, when I got hired, Grantmakers in the Arts was located in Seattle, Washington, through just some fluke of how, you know, when they hired somebody back when they first got an executive director. There's not a critical mass of Grantmakers in Seattle. I mean, not Grantmakers in the Arts. And so one of the things that they knew was on the table was, with the new director, we may move the organization. Where there are the most arts grantmakers is New York, where I happen to live and work anyway. But with the board of directors, we specifically decided we didn't want to be in, you know, central Manhattan. We didn't want to be by Rockefeller Center. We wanted to be explicit that if you support the arts, you need to support communities of color, you need to support low-income communities, and we would be locating the office in the South Bronx. And it's walking distance from you, and it's walking distance from where I grew up, and it has the best neighborhood, the best food in New York.
Yes, and I have to, and the Bronxite in us come up. We can't avoid it. But imagine, and this is what got us to that point, because we traveled around the world. Imagine us in a mountain in Slovakia, which beautiful country that we love going. We have amazing partners there, and talking to local vendors. And when they heard we were from the Bronx, they were like, "Oh my God! And is it okay over there?" This is like that. Then in Canary Islands in Spain, or then in Antwerp in Belgium, and the same question again and again. The Bronx, you're from the Bronx? And that's when we said we have to be even more intentional about who we are, where we're from, and why we have to do this work.
I want to make space for folks to ask any questions or make any remarks, but in closing, I just want to say what an honor, Rosalba, this has been to be on this stage with you. You are a great leader, and I am so grateful for you.
You are to us. You are a shining light to all of us, Eddie. We're so proud of you, so proud. Thank you, thank you.
So now let's make space in case anybody has any questions or remarks. Yeah, please.
Hi, hola. So I have a question. Rosalba, you said earlier that the glass ceiling has been scratched. What is it going to take to shatter it? What do we got to do?
More scratches. More scratches, you know, it certainly has a lot. What does it takes is just forums like this, the intentionality of leaders like the ones who organize this festival. I remember when this festival was formed years ago, and it continues to be a very valuable and valid reason to exist. And so these are the types of pushes that we need to make. I mean, true, you get frustrated because you can, you know, kick the door so often, and sometimes you have to stop. But the reality is that we don't stop. You stop for a moment, or you pause, I should say. We pause. But we just need to continue to be more intentional about the partnerships we build, about the work we create, and not to be afraid of that mainstream or those sectors of the industry that we should be pushing harder because they have the resources to make sure that things can happen. And they sometimes only they can make it happen. But on the other hand, there's this whole critical mass of all of us who have made it happen so far and will continue to work on it until now. We might at some point say, you know, let the ceiling hang in there because we have these other doors that we can open. So, you know, let it be scratched sometimes. But right now, I'm more concentrated in the doors we can open, and we scratch, we continue. Maybe one day it will crumble, if not in my lifetime, in the next 2 or 3 generations.
Thank you guys for being here. Can you hear me? First off, I want to tell you, my mom and dad grew up in the Bronx, and there's a lot of awesome tradition, and it's, you know, it seems to change through the decades, but it's a wonderful place, and I love the fact that you're both situated there. I wanted to ask you what you talked about when you said, done right, the audience trusts the work, and it makes me think of, you know, you mentioned Lin-Manuel Miranda, and I feel like in anything in life, you know, it's so important to, as you've been talking about, partner with the right people. And I wonder if you could just expand on if you are partnering with all those key people like Lin-Manuel and Chita Rivera and whoever those the role models and individuals are that have brought in credibility. And then on the raising side, I thought it was brilliant what you were starting to talk about. I'd love to hear, have you gotten to the point, even with all the challenges, have you figured out that, have you had that aha moment where you're like, if we keep doing this over and over again, we're going to go from 9 to 15 to, you know, 100? So those are my two.
Wow, yeah, totally. I think that finding the right relationships is crucial, and to me, it's very important to not to be too comfortable in what we're doing. So, okay, we're doing well. We've gotten this far, but what would be a next step? You know, to continue to grow, which is why, you know, we can do this. We're working with Lynn or whoever. You know, we can partner with these large theaters, and we also are, as I said, we're partnering with this community garden, because this is a place of gathering for the community, and this is a place where community. Thank you. Going to places where not much was happening, and that to know that you plant a seed, and that if enough water is put in there, it will grow. And I can give you an example of Allentown in Pennsylvania when we went in 1990s, and there was just not a single, there was great community activism, but not a single theater company or something that was Latino in any way, or Puerto Rican in that case, which is what they were looking for. And I remember when we went there and we found ourselves in the middle of these racial tensions and this aggression and these situations that was a little scary at times, but we began to work slowly and slowly with that community, and those who wanted to work started very small, and on to the point that a lot of scratches enough to bring down some resistance. I mean, to the point where when we performed at one of the universities, 3 trustees resigned because that stage had not been built for Spanish dialogues. 3 trustees from the university resigned because we had done something bilingual as a guest of that university. That was the extreme. On the other hand, there were these people that were really wanted to work and do something together, and we began to concentrate intentionally in those community pockets that were there to begin to build and build and build until then there was sort of a movement in the town. Fast forward, last year we went to Bethlehem, to the nearest town, which we have partnered with Touchstone Theater for over 30 years as well. And they put together a group, and they came from Allentown to visit and say hi, because we haven't seen each other in about 20 years. We spent the memories we shared, where they are at today compared to where they were 20 years ago. I want to think we had a little to do with that. But they did the work. They did the work. So a lot of the partnerships is about igniting a moment, and then it all depends on who wants to take it on to continue to move it forward.
I see we are out of time. I'm so sorry, because we could go on doing this all evening, but we will be around for a few minutes, and so we're available. And again, I want to say thank you so much, Rosalba.
Thank you, Eddie. Thank you.
And thank you all for being with us.
Thank you to this amazing festival, and congratulations.